Here's the harsh truth that no one wants to admit. Some of the most important discoveries in history started by asking the hard questions that almost no one else dared to touch. That's what made Albert Einstein different. He didn't just accept the status quo, the prevailing wisdom of physics at the time. Time, space, gravity, things that once seemed natural, fixed and unchanging, suddenly became dynamic, complex, and alive once someone dared to look closer. But Einstein didn't stop at questioning physics. Oh no. He dared to question capitalism, a system that the US tries so hard to instill in us from a young age as natural, fixed, and unchanging, just like physics. And he came out the other side as a socialist. But we were never taught about this side of Einstein in school, because it would mean that we would begin to ask the questions that no one else wants us to ask. But that is the purpose of this video, because we will be asking 3 important questions that the US government doesn't want you asking. We'll first explore what capitalism and socialism are really all about, why we aren't taught about them correctly in school, and finally, who really benefits from framing capitalism as the natural order of things. Let's get into it. In order to understand socialism, we first have to understand capitalism, because socialism can only happen after capitalism is instated. Let me explain why. The origins of American capitalism can be traced back to the American Revolution, which was really just a struggle of feudalism versus capitalism if you look closely. In fact, it all really boils down to a class war of middle-class merchants, the bourgeoisie, and lower-class laborers, the proletariat, fighting against the feudal aristocracy, the landowners. And of course, feudalism made no sense, because the nobles didn't actually do any important work, nor did those nobles provide the common people with a good life. And capitalism promised freedom and opportunity for all. And for a time, it did do its job, at least better than feudalism did. Shop owners and merchants were no longer unfairly taxed, and they saw great prosperity since property could now be owned and exchanged in the form of private property. Competition was encouraged, which meant innovation skyrocketed and technology was able to raise the living standards of the average person far beyond what any middle-aged peasant could have ever dreamed of under feudalism. This is what we were taught in school. And it's true that capitalism is a better system than feudalism. However, the bar is in hell, because behind every vault of gold that the new owning class, the bourgeoisie, own, lay the bones of nameless workers who were promised freedom and a better life, but received only death in return. The evils of capitalism are clearer day by day, and yet many people still haven't questioned whether we can do better than capitalism. But Einstein did. He asked the hard questions, and through that, he found out what capitalism really is. A system that is characterized by private ownership of the means of production, which basically means anything that lets you produce stuff, like farms, factories, stuff like that. In practice, this means a few rich old guys basically act like kings within the workplace, paying their workers only what they need to survive, while they reap most of the fruits of our hard work. And that's because capitalism is a system that prioritizes profit for those old rich guys over the well-being of its citizens. And this is where we find the contradiction in capitalism that really doesn't take a genius like Einstein to point out. The owners want the most amount of profit possible, which means maximizing productivity and minimizing expenses. What this means for the workers are long hours with low pay. But the workers are having none of that. We want to be paid as much as possible while doing the least amount of work. But under capitalism, the group that gets what they want are the owners, not us. Because the rich old guys, they own everything. And that gives them leverage to fire their workers, which means any talks of unionizing might result in someone literally losing their ability to survive. Under capitalism, you work or you die. Unless you have a piece of paper that says you don't have to do any hard work, you just have to boss around other people. So in this system, the workers are forced into a toxic dependency with the owners. Also, there are cycles of boom and bust in capitalism that happen around every 10 years because capitalism is based on profit, which requires infinite growth. But you can't have infinite market growth all the time because of inflation. Remember from economics class, inflation and unemployment have a negative relationship, and every recession leads to mass unemployment, which is necessary to bring down inflation. However, this is obviously a really bad self-regulation system because mass unemployment leads to famine and death for the workers. And this massive amount of death and suffering is the price for the market to reset itself. If that's not bad enough, capitalism's reliance on infinite growth with a finite amount of resources on Earth means eventually implode in on itself and cause the end of the world, which we're starting to see with AI. Even the resources that still exist must be extracted by force, against the will of the people who live in the land where the resources are, in order to replenish the supplies necessary to make a profit, using the cheapest labor possible to extract those supplies. Einstein saw these evils of capitalism, the promises that it failed to keep, and he thought about a system that actually prioritized the people over the profit. And that system ended up being socialism. So let's find out what socialism actually is. The most important idea of socialism is actually democracy. Instead of each company being functionally a dictatorship by a single executive owner, each company is democratically owned by and operated by the people who work there. If this concept doesn't make sense, think of your workplace under capitalism like a village, except this village is ruled by a despotic war chief who forces you to work all day and you have no say in how your village is run. Whereas your village under socialism has town-wide meetings to decide how much people work and how your village is run. Oh, and by the way, in both villages, you own your house. The next most important idea of socialism is its motive. While capitalism prioritizes profit for owners who don't do any of the work, in socialism, any profits that are made go back into the workers' profits or are used to help run the company. Socialism puts the people first. In simpler terms, let's take another look at our village. Under capitalism, let's say you're a village farmer and the despotic war chief takes 85% of the crops that you harvest. But under socialism, you might have to give up half of your harvest, but in exchange, you can go to the village apothecary wherever you want. You have unlimited access to the village cookout, and you're guaranteed a share of the other villagers' harvests. Imagine that instead of the chief taking 85% of the crops that the villagers grow, the crops are instead equally distributed among all of the villagers. Remember what Marx said, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Under socialism, there would still be innovation, like in the Soviet Union with the whole going to space thing. But this innovation would be for the benefit of all people, instead of being for the benefit of one old white guy. And it's important to remember that socialism is not meant to be a perfect system. It is a transition period between capitalism and communism. And the difference between socialism and communism is literally just time. Because the goal of communism is to eliminate class divide, state control, and money altogether. So everyone would be equal and everyone would be able to live a fulfilling life. But what this means is that communism has never actually happened on a large scale. Because every country that you might attribute the label communist to, like the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, North Korea, those countries were socialists. Because every country you attribute the label communist to still had class divide, money, and or state control. So those countries were still socialist in a lower stage of communism. But Max, why hasn't communism happened yet? Well, the reason for that, broadly speaking, is that in order for communism to truly have been achieved, it must be international. There must be a period of international socialist cooperation, or global socialism. This obviously hasn't happened because of the influence of capitalist imperial countries like the US. And those imperialist powers have used force and violence to eliminate any socialist experiment that attempts to run, such as that of Cuba or Venezuela. There are also internal failures of socialist leadership. But the failures of socialism are not all external, because the revolutionary leadership sometimes fails to prioritize the interests of the people, like in Angola, for example, which is why the core principle of socialism is democracy. Any socialist experiment that overemphasizes consolidation of power and productivity over the needs of the people will fail. But we can look at a case of socialism that actually worked the way it was intended to. In Burkina Faso, things were actually really great after the socialist revolution until the French capitalists came in and staged a coup. So, short-lived experiment, but the lives of Burkina Faso citizens were massively improved under socialism. But even though this experiment only lasted a few years, we can learn from the results of this socialist experiment on a smaller scale to see how global socialism might be able to work as intended and improve the lives of ordinary people across the world. To see how global socialism might be able to improve the lives of everyone, including you and I, on an international scale. Now that we've discussed what socialism really is, let's take more inspiration from Einstein and ask the questions that the government doesn't want us to ask. Why don't we learn about the true nature of socialism and communism in school? And who benefits from us having such a distorted view of socialism? One easy place to start is how in economics class, we learn that capitalism is just free trade and communism is just government control, which is bullshit because communism has never actually happened. It's a word weaponized by the owning class of American oligarchs to mean government control of the markets and dictatorial oppression and restriction of people's freedom, which isn't even true, but okay. In fact, economics teachers in the US rarely, if ever, assign any material on Karl Marx because if they did, they would risk students waking up to the truth about capitalism that Einstein found. And these students might decide that capitalism must be replaced. To top it off, in middle school and sometimes even high school history classes, socialism often gets confused with European social democracies, which are still capitalist, by the way, but they're really just progressive and heavily regulated capitalist countries. Think like Bernie Sanders or Zoran Mamdani type ideology. But we're not taught that those countries are bad, evil, or authoritarian because they aren't socialist. These social democracies, since they're still capitalist, pose no threat to the system of American oligarchs that control the government, the media, and the education system. In fact, If the invisible hand of the market even exists, its purpose is to indoctrinate children against socialism and communism. By the way, that hand isn't really invisible right now because they're already doing that in Florida explicitly. Because if you think back, the fundamental principle of economics that we first learn is scarcity, which means we humans must compete for a finite amount of resources. Not everyone is going to end up getting what they need. But in reality, we produce way more than we need. But because the fruits of our labor are extracted disproportionately to old rich white guys who don't care about us, the economic system is able to create the illusion of scarcity. But in fact, the indoctrination program goes a little farther back than just high school. Because in middle school, remember reading dystopian novels like The Giver, for example? You remember how the plot of The Giver was basically about a system sometime in the future that was more egalitarian, but how that system ended up turning out worse than the system that we have now because there's no color or no meaning? Those kinds of books are capitalist propaganda because they instill the belief in us that the system we have now is the best we're ever gonna get. And that's called capitalist realism. In a mindset dictated by capitalist realism, capitalism is the natural state of things. It's the end of history. It's the best we're gonna get. And any attempts to overthrow the system are futile. But what's funny is that these tactics are the exact same fucking thing that the feudal system did. In feudalism, they literally would use the churches to say that kings had the divine right to rule. And we don't have feudalism anymore because people realized that the system was bad and we needed a new one. And the same thing is happening today. Capitalism has outlived its usefulness and we need a new system. But the education system in the US that's controlled by the American oligarchs who own everything don't want you to think that. And Albert Einstein knew this. He knew that from children, the belief of capitalist realism is instilled in us. We're told by famous figures like Winston Churchill that capitalism is the worst form of government, except for all the other ones. We're told that change is impossible, it's futile, and all we can do is learn to survive in this current system. However, it doesn't take a genius to realize that schools are literally propagandizing children into being cogs in an evil machine that's going to destroy the world at your expense and the old rich guys' profits. Fuck them. So let's learn from Einstein. Let's ask the hard question. Let's dream of a better world and take steps to creating that world. Let's fight capitalist realism and create a new socialist realism. Forget creating a better world for our children. The only way we'll have a world for our children at all is if we overthrow capitalism and replace it with a system that benefits all of humanity, not just a few assholes.
If I were to redesign the political compass test to make it an actually good test, it would probably look more like this, and the propositions would be about who should own the means of production, whose interests the state should run in, how bigotry is produced, how to deal with bigotry, and whether you want to achieve your vision by any means necessary, or if you think maybe you can make incremental progress towards a better world by voting in better people and reforming the current system.
So let's unlearn the propaganda that the government forced upon us, and let's get to work in creating a better world. And if you want to start questioning systemic oppression like Einstein and I do, I'll leave some resources in the description for you to finally become a truly free thinker and start your journey to becoming an anti-capitalist. Until next time, a better world is possible. Fuck it. A world at all is possible. Let's work on creating one together. Hi, doggos. Can you guys leave my set, please?